Good stuff.
What have you been doing?
I've been sitting here, just deciding what video games to play as always. As you know, Bal, it's always a thing. No, I was a bit more resolute this time, and I decided I wanted to make sure I was ready for the new Phoenix Wright game, which came out recently, and I've started a little bit of it, but I had never played Ace Attorney 4, which is called Apollo Justice, and it's still a DS game, so it's following on from the trilogy. Although the trilogy originally was a GBA games in Japan, which were then ported to the DS, so the DS was the first place we got them in the West. But in any case, this was the missing link, because I had played the whole trilogy, the original Phoenix Wright. I had played Dual Destinies, which was the first 3DS game, and Dual Destinies carries some things over from that first in the second trilogy, Apollo Justice, but it wasn't really that explicitly linked, so I wasn't really missing out on much. But listening to RFN, Seren was on there, and she was talking about how Spirit of Justice definitely pays off some things that happened in the previous two games, and I was like, okay, well, the trilogy of Phoenix Wright ended in a spectacular way that hit a lot harder if you had played the first two and knew what happened in those games. So I thought perhaps this would be a similar thing. As a result, I decided, okay, I'm going to grab Ace Attorney 4 and just blast my way through it. I should have probably decided to do this earlier, because it meant that if I wanted to get this done in time for playing the new one on time, I had to basically do it in a week. So we were away off in somewhere in Scotland. Where was it, Bally? I can't remember now. I told you. Troon, that's where it was. I thought it was north, it wasn't. It was near Glasgow, it was south somewhere. Anyway, went there. I had my DS, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to start burning through this. So I got a good amount of it through there, and then got home and blasted through the rest. So Apollo Justice uses a new main character. It's set 7 years after the events of the third game, and there are definitely from the very off things that make you think, okay, this is linked in some way to what happened after that third game ended, and there is a huge gap that needs to be filled. There are mysteries to be solved, and there is an arc that is definitely going to take me back in time to figure out what happened 7 years ago. I think that's one thing that I really like about Phoenix Wright, is where it's strongest is the final cases generally do this thing where they call back to previous cases and also call back to the history of the past, and generally some case that happened 10 years ago or something, right? So I knew that was coming in this game, and I think it gave me a more positive impression of it than other people have had, because what I've heard of people talk about Apollo Justice online is like, it's one of the worst games in the series, it has a bad character, and it's not very well written or whatever, and it just doesn't do that much interesting. And I had the complete opposite reaction. I thought it was actually a really fascinating story, and filling in the gaps was something that I'm just a sucker for. It's similar to time travel, how I like things being looped together and like all locked into place. In this way, it's the same idea, but you figure things out of what happened in the past and how they relate to the future, right? So that's an aspect of the games that I've always been a fan of, and by doing that in this game, it really gave me that sense of nostalgia for the original, because I think the end of the original Phoenix Wright very much is tied up in, we need to figure out what happened back then and how it can help us bust through this case, because there are characters related to both and there's something like intertwined. It was also something interesting back in the days of the original Phoenix Wright, where when I was like 14 or something when I played that game, and there are like legal terms that get brought up, like the statute of limitations, which is the time that passes between when a case can be reopened and re-examined and when it basically goes defunct and no one can really use it again, basically. And so that was something that I just thought was interesting and related to this one as well. But when it comes down to the gameplay, it's the same stuff you always done in court. Doing that stuff is by far the most interesting. I always find the investigation sequences a little mundane. They're more just like, hey, I need to collect this piece of evidence. I don't know why I need it just yet, but it's going to be useful at some point. There's some intrigue that happens there, but for sure, like, it continues the tradition of the court scene being the most dynamic, most interesting, intense part of the game, and so I continue to enjoy that. The main mechanic they introduce in 4 is the idea of perceiving, which is basically this idea that Apollo has a bracelet and it allows him to pick up on tells that the witnesses are basically giving something away. So if someone is saying a particular line and there is some falsehood in it, or there's something relating to that line that makes them basically look as if they're lying, you have to perceive on their person a little tick that is like, okay, so this woman is scratching her scarf because there's some scar on her neck or whatever, and I notice that when you say this line, you scratch your scarf, and that means that you're lying or something, and that basically makes them go into this sequence of saying, okay, I was lying, and this is what I actually did, and this is what actually happened. The problem I have is you have to zoom in on the person and basically slow motion go through these lines, which get broken up into segments. So not only are you choosing the line, you're kind of choosing the individual segment of the line, which specifically relates to the problem they're having. And as such, like, you're watching this particular part of them is like, is their eye blinking? Is their throat swallowing? Are they like scratching their thumb? Are they fiddling with their ring finger? Like, there are multiple parts of their bodies that could be having something done to them, and as a result, you're spending a lot of time just sitting there and being like, am I on the right statement? Like, because you have multiple statements you can press at once. And so it's like, am I on the right statement? Am I on the right part of the line? Am I missing something here? Is this like really hard for me to see because it all is in black and white for some reason? It's just finicky and not fun to discover. Like, there are moments where it's like, okay, I get what you're doing. It seems like a cool, neat thing to bring to the series, but I was much more frustrated by it than enthralled, and as a result, I ended up looking up, like, what the fuck do I do here? Like, there's one particular one which involves a sweaty armpit, which I don't know how anyone in their right fucking mind is able to discern that without looking at a guide, and I was like, this is absurd.
It just sounds like it's moving away from what a lawyer would actually think about in a courtroom.
Yes, that's true. The Phoenix Wright games have always been goofy and silly in their own right.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of use of spirit mediums and people who are dead basically warging into the bodies of people who are alive. That's a thing that happens a lot in the original trilogy. So there's a lot of weird goofiness that goes on. You cross-examine a parrot in the original game. Like, this series is definitely off the rails at points. So I understand why this system fits into it, but also it's not strong mechanically, so I didn't enjoy that part. But I think the story is excellent, and what it gets at and the elements of the past that it picks up on are really fascinating, and I'm glad I know what has happened, because already I'm on case 2 of Spirits of Justice now, and one of the characters, Trucy, who's like a main character in Ace Attorney 4, is talking about all this stuff with magicians and the past, and I now have context of that. Like, that has meaning to me now that it wouldn't have had before. So I'm definitely glad that I played it, and yeah, one of these days, Bally, the Phoenix Wright trilogy is available on the eShop. One of these days, you're going to get it, and you'll understand.
It's a series I want to try out.
Yeah.
It's just... It takes time to get to all these things. I'll get there. I will get there.
It does. It takes time, and time we will have eventually. But if you enjoyed this discussion and would like to hear more, consider subscribing to us on YouTube and following the podcast playlist. You can also find us on iTunes and various other places. Follow us on Twitter at TNL Podcast and email us thisnintendolife@gmail.com. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.